Tonight on Ukraine Today, explosions in Russia, a sleepless night in Belgorod, a massive fire at an oil pumping station in Tatarstan, and enemy helicopters hit in Russia's Oryol region. Counteroffensive, Ukraine's defense forces liberated 300 square kilometers in the south of the country. Ukrainian ballistics. What do we know about these missiles and what do British engineers have to do with them? Civil war? Unrest in Mexico after the elimination of the leader of the most powerful drug cartel. The army and criminals are using heavy weapons. All this and more right now. Hello, I'm Volodymyr Robchun and this is Ukraine Today. Please subscribe, give this video a like and let's begin. Let's start with events in Russia. A series of powerful explosions rocked Belgorod. Local media report that several districts of the city lost electricity. There are also problems with water and heating supply. Ukrainian drones paid a visit to the Kaleykino oil pumping station in Tatarstan. A large-scale fire broke out there. There are also reports of enemy helicopters Mi-8 and Ka-52 being hit in Russia's Oryol region. The strike reportedly targeted the Pugachev airfield. It is likely that Russia uses this airfield as a base for helicopters tasked with intercepting Ukrainian long-range drones. 300 square kilometers have been liberated from Russian occupiers by Ukraine's defense forces. We're talking about the southern direction. Here are the details.
The air assault forces of the Ukrainian armed forces have officially launched an offensive. A corresponding statement was published the day before by the Air Assault Forces Command. Thus, essentially, the General Staff dispelled rumors and stated openly, Ukraine is moving forward. The main task assigned to the units is to disrupt the occupiers' plans to advance in the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia regions, as well as to defeat the enemy grouping and push them beyond the borders of Dnipropetrovsk region.
Well, we really can say today that the counter-attacking activity of the Ukrainian defense forces is currently taking place in the Huliaipol direction, in the Stepnohersk direction, and not only there. It's not just the southern front, far from it. Therefore, it is obvious that Ukraine is using the reserve resources we have and the opportunities that have arisen, including by introducing a certain amount of chaos, such as disabling Starlink.
At the same time, a number of military analysts note that the Russian Federation is gradually regaining its footing. Reserves that had been prepared for the spring offensive were redeployed from Moscow to the areas where the Ukrainian armed forces broke through. The occupiers are also partially trying to restore reliable communications on the front line. However, so far neither effort has produced any significant results.
There are several main reasons for the success of the Ukrainian attacks. The shutdown of Starlink, resulting in the loss of stable communications for Russian troops, as well as the overall exhaustion of Putin's units in this sector of the front after prolonged continuous assaults. In addition, the Ukrainian armed forces took advantage of the weather conditions, the same fog that had previously played into the hands of Russian troops several times.
Another crucial factor in Ukraine's success was the preparedness of Russian troops on the other side of the front line, or more precisely, the almost complete lack thereof.
Well, I'll say it straight. 80% are untrained troops. These are people they gathered from various places under different pretexts, mobilization, recruitment, and pressure. So accordingly, they are thrown into battle.
It is also worth noting that the reports about the Ukrainian armed forces liberating hundreds of square kilometers of Ukraine have now been officially confirmed by the military. For example, the spokesperson for the Southern Defense Forces, Vladislav Voloshin, stated that more than 300 square kilometers have already been liberated and our troops continue to advance.
Ukrainian forces are counterattacking along a wide front approximately 30 kilometers from Varvarivka to Ternova-Ternivate. If the entire area along this stretch is cleared of infiltrating Russian soldiers, it would amount to about 300 square kilometers.
The command notes that information about the advance of the Ukrainian armed forces is announced with a delay, so as not to jeopardize operations, as has happened in the past. But even what has already been made public allows for cautious predictions that the successes of the defense forces may help thwart Putin's major spring offensive.
On this point, it can be said that Ukraine, again, I'm not getting ahead of myself because the security of the ongoing military operation is paramount, has, in my view, at least for now, managed to make adjustments to the conduct of the Zaporizhzhia-Oryol offensive operation of the Russian Federation. And here indeed we should pause for a moment.
As has already been noted, alongside the advancing assault units of the Ukrainian armed forces, the unmanned systems forces are also showing excellent results, continually increasing enemy losses. And the fact that the occupiers are being forced to retreat has also dispelled yet another myth about the Russian Federation. People there do in fact run out.
If he actually had them, he would have already thrown in another 500,000 whom he doesn't have in all directions, and would have long since entered Pokrovsk and would have already entered Huliaipol and Zaporizhzhia. Yes, he would have advanced, but that hasn't happened. In other words, he isn't holding back resources somewhere, hiding them, as many say. So why is that? It's just that he simply doesn't have them ready in reality.
By the way, Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky also confirmed in an interview with Le Monde that the war in Ukraine has moved out of a deadlock. According to the General Staff, the front has started to move in the opposite direction, and in recent days there have been up to 50 clashes daily in the Huliaipol and Oleksandrivka directions.
The defense forces have also debunked Russian disinformation about the alleged occupation of the settlement of Tarnuvate in the Zaporizhzhia region. The town remains under Ukrainian control. A small number of Russian troops may still be hiding in basements. They are currently being searched for. Over the past 24 hours, Russia has lost at least 720 troops killed and wounded. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, that brings the total to 1,260,500 occupiers. In addition, during the last 24 hours, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed 2 Russian tanks, 13 armored combat vehicles and 40 artillery systems, plus dozens of other pieces of enemy equipment. Russian propaganda claimed the destruction of transport loading vehicles for HIMARS systems and launcher platforms for Flamingo missiles. And now, the painful truth for the occupiers. There is no such equipment. I mean, it doesn't exist at all. The HIMARS system does not use separate transport loading vehicles, and Flamingo missiles are launched from standard rails, not from any special launcher platforms. But then again, we never really expected honesty from Russian propaganda, did we? Since we've mentioned Flamingo, let's take a closer look at Ukrainian missiles, particularly domestically produced ballistic systems. What is known about them and what role do British engineers play? All the details in the report.
This is a powerful Ukrainian missile that today is deeply feared not only by our enemies, but thanks to its incredible precision and remarkably low production cost, it is even causing a significant amount of concern among Kiev's international partners. In February 2022, we asked our Western partners to close the airspace over Ukraine. But by February 2026, it is Europe that is asking Ukraine to share its unique experience on how to do this independently.
This is a very simple technology. There's nothing complicated needed here. There are plenty of books written about this where everything is explained step by step. What's so difficult about it?
As it turns out, modern American and European air defense technologies have a huge drawback: their cost. Even though Western weaponry has no technological equals, given the current realities of warfare, NATO would only be able to defend against enemy missiles and drones for a few days. The West simply doesn't have the resources for more than that, because each missile costs tens or even hundreds of times more than the drones it is used to destroy.
Now, intercepting an Iskander that actually costs well over $6 million in total, which is quite a significant amount.
And this is where Ukraine comes to the West's aid with its unique Flamingo missile.
We want to bring this down to $1 million, $1.5 million, so that intercepting an Iskander would cost that much.
With the help of the FP9 missile.
With the help of the advanced FP7 missile system.
The Ukrainian Flamingo is already demonstrating unprecedented effectiveness and accuracy, striking strategic targets in Russia. Developed in record time, the missile has become yet another headache for Putin and his generals. Since the development is entirely domestic, the Ukrainian armed forces do not need permission to strike Flamingo wherever they want or need to. The only problem our developers have to contend with is scaling up. So far, it has not been possible to produce a sufficient number of missiles per month for the Ukrainian armed forces.
This is a strategic weapon. Unfortunately, strategic weapons cannot be bought or launched today in the same quantities as hotcakes, like it happens with FPV drones, so that the final effect is clearly seen by every single person in the community, reaching into every individual household. But based on the various missions that have been carried out so far, we see that it has successfully and completely fulfilled the specific goals and objectives that we initially established for it.
Since there are still not enough domestic missiles to strike all targets on Russian territory, our Western partners have to help with this as well. For example, the United Kingdom is developing a new deep strike ballistic missile for Ukraine.
We can confidently assert that, first and foremost, we are talking about a missile that can be quickly scaled up and is a highly affordable and accessible strategic resource. Since the government of the United Kingdom is specifically emphasizing that this should be an economically viable and sustainable long-term solution, that is, it must effectively meet the evolving demands of the times. As we clearly see that the modern armed forces need an exceptionally vast and consistent supply of such weapons, and it simply cannot be too expensive for the budget.
As a result, within the framework of the Nightfall project, Britain announced a competition for the accelerated development of ballistic missiles intended for combat operations under conditions of high threat and strong electromagnetic interference. The modern English missile will be able to launch from various platforms, carry out a series of launches, and leave its position within a matter of minutes. The system will be equipped with a 200-kilogram high-explosive warhead, feature high accuracy, and have a range of up to 500 kilometers.
500 kilometers that completely covers all the temporarily occupied territory of Ukraine. It also covers a significant portion of the European part of the Russian Federation. And at this depth, the enemy positions both its higher-level headquarters, from brigade up to divisional, army, and group of forces levels. These are also quite serious logistical hubs. In other words, these are places where fuel and lubricants, as well as ammunition depots, are concentrated.
In combination with the Ukrainian Flamingo, the British missile could significantly reduce the Kremlin's and personally Putin's desire to continue their campaign. Instead of launching missile strikes on peaceful Ukrainian cities, the bunker dweller will be forced to endlessly defend against missiles from the Ukrainian armed forces.
The ever-increasing frequency and the sheer intensity of operations carried out by our security forces using strike drones, including those directed against highly significant strategic military targets, are systematically exhausting and wearing down the enemy's air defense forces. Furthermore, the powerful combination of ballistic weapons and strike drones can already deliver precise targeted strikes against specific enemy assets that are absolutely vital and critically important to their operations.
And it will only get worse from here, at least for the Kremlin. Ukrainian developers promise to reach the necessary supply volumes of ballistic weapons for the armed forces of Ukraine by the end of this year, while simultaneously creating more and more types of advanced weaponry.
In 1 year, it's ballistics. In 2 or 3 years, it's the creation of an anti-ballistic air defense shield over all of Europe.
This is meant for every single nation across Europe.
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. Now's the time to subscribe, like this video and share it so more people can see it. Thank you and glory to Ukraine. A terrorist attack in Lviv. 2 explosive devices were detonated. A 23-year-old police officer was killed. 24 other people were injured. According to investigators, law enforcement officers arrived at the scene after receiving a false call. The first explosion occurred shortly after their arrival. The second went off when other police crew arrived. 20 of injured remain in hospital. 3 are in extremely critical condition. A suspect believed to be involved has been detained. The attack followed a massive Russian strike on Ukraine. The main targets were energy and infrastructure facilities. Residential buildings were damaged in Kyiv and its suburbs. Transport infrastructure facilities were hit in Mykolaiv. Energy infrastructure was damaged in the Odessa region. Later, the Russian forces struck Zaporizhzhia. One person was killed. An industrial infrastructure facility was damaged. Kharkiv was also attacked. American business in Ukraine under Russian strikes. While U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff holds talks with Kremlin representative Kirill Dmitriev, Russian forces are destroying American enterprises in Ukraine. A recent example, an attack on the Mondelez plant.
A blow to the negotiations, the reliability of American security guarantees, and personally to Donald Trump. The Kremlin is ramping up attacks on the backbone of the American administration, business, investments, and factories.
You are not in a position to negotiate. You have no cards to play. With us, you gain cards to play.
Trump extends sanctions against Russia. In response, the terrorist federation launches a missile strike on the American confectionery giant Mondelez, the producer of well-known chocolate and candy bars in the city of Trostianets, Sumy region.
Russia has recently struck another American business operating in Ukraine, a large civilian manufacturing facility owned by Mondelez in the town of Trostianets. This site represented one of the very first major US corporate investments in Ukraine's independent economy.
The strike on the civilian confectionery plant is far from the first Russian greeting from Putin to the Americans and Trump. In January 2026, a Russian Shahed drone hit an American oil producer in Dnipro. And in August, after a conciliatory meeting with a red carpet in Alaska, 2 Russian Kaliber missiles struck an electronics factory in Mukachevo. Putin is essentially reducing Trump's security guarantees for Ukraine, business, money, and investments to zero.
Trump stated that the guarantee of our country's territorial integrity is the agreement signed between Ukraine and the United States on the joint use of Ukrainian mineral resources.
Half of the members of the American Chamber of Commerce in Ukraine have suffered damage to or complete destruction of their facilities. American factories are neither a shield nor even an iron dome. American facilities burn just like other enterprises that have come under Russian missile and drone strikes.
That's true. They have no plans. He hasn't had any plans from day one. He has only one thing, Donald Trump.
Most damaging of all, the White House does not respond in any way to the Kremlin's actions. While Russians are bombing American enterprises, at the same time, Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff is discussing an unrealistic $12 trillion business deal with Kirill Dmitriev.
The response should be economic pressure from the United States on the Russian Federation, an intensification of economic sanctions, primarily blocking not only the shadow fleet and the oil refining industry of the occupying country, but above all, blocking the Russian banking sector. This would be a devastating blow to the economy of the Russian Federation.
Without a strong response and tangible countermeasures, the St. Petersburg thug never stops. Putin is not interested in Trump's alternative reality with untouchable business. The dictator has his own reality, one with exploding missiles. Only strengthening Ukrainian air defense and additional sanctions pressure can affect this reality.
And finally, a topic that simply cannot be ignored. The situation in Mexico is increasingly resembling a civil war. Unrest intensified after the elimination of El Mencho, the leader of the country's most powerful drug cartel. The army and criminal groups are using heavy weapons. They are killed and wounded. International airlines are cancelling flights. Amid gun battles on the streets, tourists are forced to remain inside their hotel rooms. We are closely monitoring developments. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Like, subscribe, comment, share. And see you next time.